Seattle rain has a personality that it doesn't fall. It lingers, whispering against the windows like an old friend who doesn't know when to leave. That night it hovered outside my parents' house, thick enough to turn the streetlights into blurred halos. Inside, everything looked exactly the same as it had 20 years ago, except the air felt heavier, as if the walls already knew what was coming. Mom moved between stove and table, humming to fill the silence. Dad sat at the head, swirling whiskey, pretending contentment. Hannah scrolled her phone, glowing in the light like a saint made of pixels, and I, as usual, watched, the quiet daughter in a family addicted to noise. Then Dad lifted his glass. To Hannah, he said, voice warm with pride and alcohol, your sister earned everything on her own, unlike you, Emily. The clink of ice was louder than his words. Mom's hand froze mid-air, spoon dripping gravy onto the tablecloth. Hannah looked up, a half-smile playing on her lips, already used to applause. For me, something shifted, a small, precise crack in a wall that had held too long. I'd practiced patience my whole life. But that night, patience felt like surrender. So I set down my fork, looked straight at him, and said softly, then I'll stop sending you money. The sentence was quiet, but it landed like a storm. The house stopped breathing. Even the rain seemed to pause at the windows. Dad blinked once, twice. What money? He wasn't angry yet, just confused, like a man watching a fuse burn toward a charge he forgot he'd planted. The $5,000 I've been wiring to Hannah every month. For you and Mom. Since last April. Mom's lips parted, a soundless, oh, escaped. Hannah's smile flickered. She's exaggerating, she said quickly. There were delays. Every month, I interrupted. On the first. I have the confirmations. The silence that followed had weight. You could hear the refrigerator hum, the faint tick of the hallway clock, the rain returning to its rhythm. Dad put down his glass carefully, as if any sudden motion might break something else. We never saw a cent. Hannah lifted her chin. There were expenses. Investments. What kind of investment costs $60,000 and leaves you with nothing to show? I asked. Her eyes narrowed. You wouldn't understand. You've never taken a risk in your life. You build safe little dreams and call them goals. I almost laughed. Believing in family shouldn't be unsafe. Mom whispered, please, stop. But the words were already loose. There's no undoing a truth that finally finds its voice. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping across hardwood like chalk on a board. Then I guess it's her problem now. Dad's hand tightened around his glass. Hannah stared down at her plate, cheeks pale, jaw locked. The rain outside grew louder. Or maybe that was just my heartbeat catching up. That was the night I stopped being the quiet one. My name is Emily Carter, 32, architect, and resident of Seattle, where the skyline looks permanent only because people keep rebuilding it after every storm. That I used to think my family was one of those solid-looking buildings, strong from the outside, hollow in the foundation. Hannah, 2 years older, has always been our golden child. Teachers loved her, Dad adored her, Mom protected her. She was sunlight in photographs and a shadow everywhere else. Dad, Thomas Carter, ran a restaurant near Pike Place Market before the recession chewed it up. That he treated every conversation like an order that had to be perfect. Mom, Linda, learned to translate his temper into tenderness, apologizing for him before he even spoke. We looked like a family worth envying in Christmas cards, matching sweaters, forced smiles, the illusion of belonging. But peace bought with silence isn't peace, it's debt. When their mortgage slipped behind, I was a year into my first steady job at a design firm. Mom called me one night crying, voice thin and frayed. We just need a little help till we catch up. $5,000 a month. I agreed without thinking. Dad didn't trust online banking, so Hannah offered to handle it. Easier that way, she said, and I believed her because believing her had always been our family's default setting. For 12 months, I wired the money like clockwork. No thank you, no update, just silence and the illusion of helping. When Dad mentioned the mortgage being under control, I felt a small warmth, a false hope that maybe I'd finally done something right. But the last time I visited, the house looked tired, paint peeling. Fridge buzzing. Mom smiled like it was fine. Hannah's helping us manage things, she said, and I wanted to believe her. I really did. That memory flashed through my mind now, as the weight of what I'd said hung in the room. Dad rubbed his forehead, looking older than his 62 years. I don't understand. Mom's eyes were shiny with fear. Hannah bit her lip until it bled. Sometimes truth doesn't explode, it leaks, slowly, until you realize you're already drowning. That night I lay awake in my old room. The ceiling still had those cheap plastic stars I glued there at 16. The rain tapped its own language against the window, steady, insistent. Down the hall, I heard Mom crying and Dad pacing. Hannah's door stayed shut. I turned on my laptop. Blue light spilled over the bed like truth too bright to ignore. Scrolling through bank statements, I counted each transfer like a confession. April 1st, $5,000. May 1st, $5,000. Every month, unbroken $60,000. I had been buying silence. Buying family. Buying a lie I didn't know I was funding. Morning arrived in shades of silver and gray. Dad sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands. Mom stood by the window, robe tied tight. She says it's tied up in something, she whispered. An investment. A company? I asked. Companies file taxes, not excuses. Dad's jaw tensed. We'll talk to her when she wakes up. But Hannah didn't wake up. By dawn, her car was gone, her room was empty except for a faint perfume cloud and a sticky note on the dresser. Don't overreact. I'll fix it. I read it 3 times, hoping for different words. They never came. She's not fixing anything, I said. She's running. Mom cried again, quiet and tired, like she'd already rehearsed it. Dad grabbed his coat. I'll find her. I caught his sleeve. You can't chase her without proof. Let me handle this. He hesitated, pride and fear fighting behind his eyes. Then he nodded. For the first time, my father looked at me not as the quiet one, but as someone he needed. By noon the kitchen felt smaller. The smell of last night's dinner still clung to the air like it refused to leave. Dad hadn't touched his coffee. Mom kept refilling hers, just to have something to hold. The house was quiet except for the steady rain outside, soft, relentless, the sound of the Pacific breathing through the walls. I drove back to my apartment with the radio off. Every traffic light felt longer than usual. My mind kept replaying Hannah's voice. You wouldn't understand. Maybe she was right. I didn't understand how you could steal from the people who raised you and still sleep at night. When I reached home, I didn't even take off my coat. I opened my laptop, dumped every file I had onto the screen, and started tracing the money. Architecture teaches you discipline. Follow the line, measure twice, trust numbers. Families don't work that way. Families are built on stories, not math, but betrayal leaves numbers behind, little footprints of greed. By evening, my living room looked like a detective's apartment in an old noir film. Papers everywhere, sticky notes on the wall, highlighters bleeding color into gilt. Every month was a chapter. Every transfer a paragraph in a story I didn't know I was writing. My phone buzzed. Evan Reyes, colleague and friend, the kind of person who noticed when your laugh didn't reach your eyes. You still working? He asked. Trying to make sense of $60,000 that vanished into thin air, I said. You sure you want to dig this deep? I don't have a choice. This isn't about the money anymore. It's about what she thought of me. What do you mean? She assumed I'd stay silent. That I'd keep protecting the peace even while drowning in it. He paused. So what's next? The bank. I need to see where the trail ends. Outside, dusk swallowed the skyline that I pulled on my coat, hair still damp from the shower, and stepped into the kind of Seattle night that smells like salt and coffee and unresolved things. Evan met me at the corner near the old library. Ready? He asked. As I'll ever be. The bank was almost empty, a few tired tellers closing drawers. Fluorescent light made everything look more honest than it wanted to be. The manager, Margot Chin, middle-aged, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who probably slept with a file folder next to her bed, ushered us into her office. I slid my statements across the desk. These transfers, I said, 12 in total. They were supposed to go to my parents through my sister. I need to know where they actually went. Margot adjusted her glasses, fingers tapping across the keyboard. For a minute all I heard was the low hum of the printer and rain against the windows, then she frowned. These funds didn't stop at your sister's account. They were forwarded. To where? Her mouth tightened. A private account. Registered to a man named Mason Vale. The name hit the air and stayed there. Who is he? I asked. She shook her head. I can't disclose details. But I can tell you it's not a business account. Personal. The transfer started 3 days after each of your deposits. Evan leaned forward. Can you confirm location? Ballard District, she said. Then, after a pause, I shouldn't be printing this, but, a small slip of paper slid across the desk address. That's all I can give you. I looked at her. Thank you. She met my eyes. Be careful, Ms. Carter. Money isn't the only thing people steal. Back outside, wind whipped rain into thin knives. Evan pulled his hood up. Ballard's not far. You want to go tonight? No, I said. Tonight I want to think. He nodded, understanding the kind of exhaustion that comes from more than lack of sleep. When he dropped me off, the street outside my apartment shimmered with reflected headlights. Seattle at night always looks cleaner than it is, like guilt after confession. I stood by the window, watching water run down the glass. Mason Vale. A name I'd never heard, yet somehow it already knew too much about me. I made coffee I wouldn't drink and sat at my desk. The lamp cast a circle of light over my notes. Each figure, each date, each message from Hannah became a small betrayal under magnification. In the corner of the desk sat a photo. 2 girls on a beach, both laughing, hair tangled by wind. Me and Hannah, years before life divided us into roles, the responsible one and the shining one. Back then she'd said, no matter what happens, we'll always be on the same side. I believed her. I built half my life on that belief. I reached for the photo now and flipped it over. On the back, written in faded pen, sisters don't need contracts. That I almost smiled. Apparently, we did. By midnight, fatigue gave way to something steadier, clarity, the kind that comes when denial finally stops screaming. That I drafted an email to Evan with the subject line legal options and attached every piece of evidence I had. Then I opened a new document and titled it Blueprint of Restoration. Architects design spaces that hold people safely. I'd spent years doing that for strangers. Maybe it was time to rebuild the place that should have been safest of all, even if I had to tear it down first. Sleep didn't come. When I closed my eyes, I saw Hannah, not the adult version, but the teenager sneaking out her window, whispering, "Don't tell Dad, Em." That I never did. That I was always the keeper of her secrets, the quiet accomplice to her freedom. Maybe betrayal starts there, when loyalty turns one-sided. Around 3 a.m. I went for a walk. The streets were empty except for the hum of late buses and the glow of 24-hour diners. Puddles reflected the city upside down, like a parallel world where everything made sense. That I wondered if Hannah felt guilt. Or if people who betray you stop recognizing your pain as real. By morning, the decision had settled like concrete. That I showered, tied my hair back, dressed in black, not mourning, just focused. At the door, my phone buzzed, a message from Mom. Your father isn't well. He blames himself. Please don't make things worse. I stared at it for a long minute before typing back, I'm not making things worse. I'm just not pretending anymore. Later that day, I drove to my parents' house. The sky was a dull silver, the kind that makes even the ocean look tired. Mom opened the door, eyes red. Any word from her? I shook my head. No. But I found something. I told them about the transfers, the name Mason Vale, the address. Dad's face hardened. Who the hell is that? I don't know yet, I said. But I will. Mom sat down slowly. Do you think she's in trouble? I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say no. Instead I said, she's in deeper than she understands. Dad looked at me for a long time. Whatever happens, Emily, be careful. It sounded almost like love. That night, back in my apartment, the rain started again, softer this time, as if the sky was tired too. That I turned off the lights and watched it streak down the glass, each drop catching reflections of the city. Somewhere in Ballard, a man named Mason Vale existed because my sister had chosen to trust him more than us. I thought of all the ways people justify betrayal. It's complicated. It's temporary. I'll fix it, but betrayal is never complicated. It's a simple decision. To believe your comfort matters more than someone else's trust. I whispered to the rain, you wanted to play with trust, Hannah, fine. Let's see how much truth costs. The city didn't answer, but somewhere deep in the night a siren wailed, long and distant, like the sound of something breaking far away. I closed my eyes, inhaled the smell of wet asphalt and coffee, and let the quiet harden into resolve. Tomorrow I would start with the address in Ballard. Tomorrow, the story would stop being about loss and start being about proof. Morning in Seattle always begins with fog pretending to be mercy. It smooths the city's edges, hides the cranes, softens the traffic roar, as if saying you don't have to face it yet, but I had run out of hiding places. The address Margot had printed sat folded in my jacket pocket, smudged at the corners from too much rereading. Ballard Avenue NW, a converted warehouse district now full of coffee shops, tech startups, and people who believed minimalism could redeem their cluttered hearts. Somewhere between a microbrewery and a design studio, a man named Mason Vale lived or worked or both. And with him lived $60,000 and my sister's conscience. I parked 2 blocks away. The rain had backed off, leaving everything wet enough to smell new. As I walked, my reflection trailed me in every window. Same coat, same eyes, a different woman. Inside, a neon sign flickered, Vela Innovations LLC. The door was locked. A security camera blinked. Through the glass I saw posters about creative collaboration and disruptive potential, the kind of vocabulary people use when they've never built anything that lasts. A young receptionist looked up from her laptop. Can I help you? I'm here for Mason Vale, I said. Do you have an appointment? I think he owes me one. She frowned, typed something, then disappeared behind a frosted partition. 2 minutes later a man appeared, mid-30s, jeans, hoodie, smile rehearsed. Emily Carter, he said as though tasting my name. Hannah's sister. Been expecting you. His calmness annoyed me more than any lie could. How convenient, I said. He opened the door, gestured inside. Let's talk. The office smelled like new carpet and false confidence. On one wall hung a whiteboard covered in arrows and buzzwords. Phase 1 launch, beta partnerships, seed round. Not a single figure looked like math done by adults. Mason perched on the edge of a desk. You must be worried. Hannah told me you're protective. She also told you I'm paying the bills, apparently. He smiled faintly. Investment bills. She believed in what we're building. I folded my arms. What are you building? Because it's not trust. He spread glossy printouts across the table, graphs, fake charts, mock-ups. Our platform connects local artisans with global clients. Scalable, ethical, community-driven. The words stacked neatly, like bricks around a hole. I flipped through the pages. You realize these numbers don't add up? They will, he said easily. Every big thing starts small. $60,000 small? His eyes sharpened, smile flattening. You've been talking to Hannah. No, I said. I've been talking to her bank. The room changed temperature. You don't understand, he said quietly. She wanted this. She asked me to double her money. She believed. And you let her, I said. Because it paid your rent. He leaned closer. You think I tricked her? She came to me. She needed to prove something, to your father, to herself, to you. That last word landed hard. People like him always aim for the wound they can't see but sense. I closed the folder. You're returning the money. He laughed softly. You think it's sitting in a drawer? Then I'll make sure the police ask where it went. Something flickered behind his eyes, not fear, calculation. You wouldn't do that to your sister. You don't know what I'd do. He smirked. Families always fold. Give it a week, you'll forgive her. You're built to. I left before my shaking hands could answer for me. Outside, drizzle resumed, thin as static. I called Evan from the car. He's exactly what you think, I said. Scammer? Charmer with a business plan made of fog. Should we go to the police? Not yet. I want Hannah to face what she funded. When I reached my parents' house, the living room light was on though it was midday. Mom sat on the couch with a blanket across her knees. Dad stood by the window, staring at the driveway as if waiting for Hannah's car to appear by apology. I told them everything, the fake company, the empty numbers, Mason Vale's arrogance. Dad's face changed by degrees, disbelief, anger, shame that he sank into his chair like the air had betrayed him. Mom whispered, she was always so trusting. She wasn't trusting, I said. She was desperate to stay perfect. No one spoke after that. The rain filled in the silence. That night the phone rang at 6 a.m. A voice I didn't recognize. Ms. Carter? Someone named Mason Vale is at your parents' address. He says it's important. My stomach dropped. I was still pulling on my jacket when the next call came. Dad, voice rough, he's here. Says he has proof. Don't let him in. But when I arrived 15 minutes later, he was already inside. Mason stood in the kitchen like a salesman at a funeral. Mom hovered near the counter, pale. Dad blocked the doorway behind him, jaw tight. Morning, Mason said pleasantly. I just want to clear up a misunderstanding. Hannah asked me to deliver these. He held up a folder, printouts, spreadsheets, contracts covered in fine print. I took it. Proof of what? Our investment, he said. See? Legitimate. Dad flipped through the papers, eyes narrowing. These are nonsense. Mason's voice stayed calm. Every startup looks like nonsense before it works. Funny, I said. Because this startup also looks like theft. He chuckled once. You really have her temper. I have receipts, I said. He blinked, briefly thrown off balance, and that's when tires crunched on gravel outside. I turned to the window. A white sedan pulled into the driveway, Hannah's car. Hannah's white sedan rolled to a stop. Through the drizzle her outline looked almost unreal. Perfect hair, immaculate coat, the performance already rehearsed. When she stepped out, the smell of her perfume drifted in before she did, the same scent she'd worn to every graduation and family photo. She hesitated only a second at the threshold, then forced a smile. Hey, everyone, she said, like this was brunch. The tension in the room thickened. Even the refrigerator stopped humming. When she saw Mason standing there, her expression fractured. What are you doing here? She asked. Mason softened his tone instantly, the practiced calm of a man who survives on persuasion. Babe, I told you I'd fix it. Her jaw tightened. You weren't supposed to come here. Dad's voice was low but lethal. You took your sister's money. You lied to us. Hannah flinched, then tried to recover. It's not what you think. Then explain, I said. Because $60,000 vanished, our mortgage slipped again, and somehow your business partner drives a new car. She turned to Mason. You said we'd double it in a year. He shrugged. Plans change. Plans, Dad echoed. He tried to laugh. This is a mistake. But his voice cracked when the cuffs clicked. They read his rights while Hannah crumpled into a chair, mascara streaking like war paint. Mom wept quietly into her hands. Dad stood motionless, the muscles in his jaw twitching with years of pride collapsing. As they led Mason past me, he turned his head and murmured, You think you've won? There's always another version of me out there. I met his eyes. Then I hope she finds someone like me too. The door closed behind him, sirens fading into the distance. The house exhaled for the first time in months. Hours later, after the police left, the air smelled of rain and metal. Hannah sat at the table staring at nothing. Her voice was small. I thought he loved me. He said this would make Dad proud. Dad looked away. Pride's a cheap fuel. It burns out fast. Mom placed a hand on Hannah's shoulder, her own shaking. Why didn't you tell us? I didn't want to disappoint you, Hannah whispered. He said success fixes everything. I knelt beside her. Success isn't something someone else can hand you. She nodded, tears cutting clean lines down her face. I know that now. But knowing doesn't rewind anything. 2 weeks later, the prosecutor called. They'd uncovered multiple scams, 5 women, same story, same promises. Mason Vale had pled guilty. They wanted Hannah's testimony to strengthen the case. At first she refused. I can't face him again. You already did, I said gently. And you survived. In court, she sat beside me, voice shaking but clear as she told the judge how she transferred my money, believing in Mason's promise. When he tried to meet her eyes, she looked straight ahead. When the verdict was read, 3 years in prison, 18 months without parole, the courtroom was silent except for the sound of relief. Dad's hand found mine under the table. Mom sobbed quietly beside him. Hannah exhaled like something heavy had finally slipped off her chest. Mason didn't look back as they led him away. That evening, we gathered in the backyard. The rain had finally stopped. The sky was a washed-out gray that smelled of earth and beginnings. Hannah held a small box filled with photos, receipts, and a few notes Mason had written. You sure you want to do this? I asked. She nodded. It doesn't mean anything now. I struck a match. Flames curled through the paper, slow at first, then hungry. Smoke rose into the cold air, carrying everything he'd touched. He took so much from me, Hannah whispered. I watched the last ember fade. Then make sure he never gets another inch. By spring, small routines returned. Mom tended her garden again, kneeling among the rosemary and thyme. Dad repaired the porch railing he'd ignored for years. The silence that once hid tension now felt almost gentle, like rest after fever. Hannah found work downtown as an office assistant. That IT wasn't glamorous, but she said it felt honest. Every evening she came home with dirt under her nails, the kind that comes from effort, not guilt. Sometimes I'd find her sitting with Mom in the garden, planting herbs, the scent of rosemary drifting through the air, the same scent that had witnessed our undoing. One night, Dad sat beside me at the dining table while I sorted bills. I think we made her this way, he said quietly. We kept calling her special until she thought she couldn't fail. I looked at him. We all played a part. But we're fixing it now. He nodded slowly. I'm proud of you, Emily. It was the first time he'd said it without adding unlike your sister. The words hit deeper than I expected. Hannah joined us with 3 mugs of tea. We'll be okay, she said, half to herself, half to us. For the first time in years, I believed her. The house was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that hides pain. This was the kind built on truth. A month later I packed a suitcase for Seattle's South End. A new job, a new project, a new beginning. Morning light spilled through the kitchen windows as Mom folded laundry and Dad read the paper. Hannah walked me to the car, her sleeves pushed up, her smile small but real. You're really leaving, she said. It's time, I answered. She slipped an envelope into my hand, a photo of us as kids, cotton candy faces, missing teeth. On the back she'd written, sometimes you have to lose everything to see what's worth keeping. As I drove away, I looked once in the rearview mirror. The house looked smaller, but lighter somehow. The rain hadn't started yet, but the sky was soft with the promise of it. Family doesn't break you unless you let it. And some storms, I thought, are the only way to clean a place you once called home. Seattle in spring smells like apology. The rain softens, trees bloom as if nothing ever drowned, people smile again, not big smiles, just the cautious kind that test the air before trusting it. It's strange how the world keeps moving while your life still catches its breath. A month after the trial, I still woke up early, the way you do when worry has trained your body better than any alarm, but instead of scrolling through bank statements, I'd make coffee, open the balcony door, and listen to the city wake. Seagulls. Fairies. Someone jogging below, ordinary noises that sounded like proof of survival. Mom had started leaving the curtains open again. Light slid across the kitchen tiles, highlighting cracks in the grout I'd never noticed. She didn't rush to hide them anymore. Imperfections let the house breathe, she said. Maybe she meant us. Dad took long walks around Green Lake. He came back smelling of rain and cedar, his steps slower, sure that he didn't talk much about Hannah, but sometimes he'd hum old songs from the restaurant days. The ones he used to play after closing time when Mom would sit at the counter and count tips. It sounded like remembering without regret. Hannah was the hardest to read. She moved through the house quietly, still waiting for a kind of forgiveness that no one could hand her, but she showed up, early mornings, late nights, helping mom in the garden, taking odd jobs downtown. Every time I looked at her hands, I saw small changes. Less jewelry, more calluses. Guilt had turned into work. One evening I found her at the porch steps, sleeves rolled up, scraping old paint. The scent of damp would fill the air. She didn't look up when she said, "I keep expecting him to text." "Mason?" She nodded. I deleted everything, but sometimes I still check the folder, like maybe he'll apologize. Would it help if he did? She thought about it. No. But it'd be nice to know he understands what he ruined. I sat beside her. The wood was cold under our legs. "People like him don't understand," I said. "They only calculate." She sighed. "You ever wish you could unknow things?" "All the time." We sat there until the sky turned the color of bruised lilac. For the first time since everything happened, the silence between us wasn't sharp. It was tired, human. At work, I'd been offered a promotion, lead designer on a small restoration project in Tacoma, old brick building, boarded windows, forgotten history. The client wanted something that looked reborn but not new. It felt like a metaphor handed to me by the universe. Evan dropped by my desk one morning, still drinking black coffee and fighting ghosts. I started driving to Ballard every few days, same streets, same gray light, but now they didn't feel haunted. Margot, the bank manager, met me once for lunch. She said, "You're not the first person he fooled, but you're the first who didn't stay silent." That sentence followed me home. It felt less like praise and more like responsibility. At night I dreamed of water. Sometimes it was the ocean, sometimes the rain, sometimes just the sound of it filling a room. I'd wake and realize I was still waiting, for closure, for permission to stop holding my breath. Trauma doesn't end when the villain leaves. It ends when you stop rehearsing the pain. So I began small rituals, throwing away old receipts, repainting the balcony rail, writing letters I never sent, to Hannah, to Dad, even to Mason, though his would have come back marked undeliverable. Each act was a blueprint for letting go. One Sunday, I visited the farmer's market near the pier. The smell of sourdough and tulips carried through the drizzle. Hannah was there, working at a stand selling herbal soaps. Her hair was tied back, her laughter softer, unperformed. When she saw me, she waved. No hesitation, no guilt in the gesture. I bought 2 bars of lavender soap I didn't need. She wrapped them carefully. "Employee discount," she said, smiling. Walking away, I realized it was the first time in years she'd sold me something honest. That evening, we ate together at Mom's table again. No toasts, no speeches, just food and warmth. Dad carved chicken, Mom passed potatoes, Hannah poured iced tea. For a second, it felt like a rehearsal for normalcy, and maybe that was enough. After dinner, Dad leaned back and said, "You remember the night I compared you to?" I nodded. "Hard to forget." "I was wrong," he said simply. "You both earned what matters." The room went quiet. Mom touched his arm, eyes shining. Hannah looked down at her plate, then at me. "Thank you," she whispered. I didn't say for what. Some acknowledgments don't need translation. Later, when the dishes were done and the rain returned, I stood on the porch watching the streetlights ripple through puddles. Hannah joined me. "Do you ever think about leaving Seattle?" she asked. "Sometimes," I said. "But then I remember how it teaches you to live with gray." She laughed. "I hate gray. I used to. Now I think it's just all the colors mixed together, complicated, but real." She was quiet a moment, then said, "I'm proud of you." I turned to her. "You too." We both laughed at how strange it sounded. Inside, Mom called out for tea that we went in together. By early June, Seattle traded its rain for a kind of soft brightness, still gray around the edges, but generous enough to let sunlight through. I moved into a small apartment near the waterfront, nothing fancy, 1 bedroom, creaky floors, a window that caught the harbor light in the mornings. After months of living in tension, the silence felt almost too wide. I filled it with sound, a kettle whistling, jazz on low volume, pages turning. Every noise became proof that life was still happening, that I hadn't paused somewhere between betrayal and recovery. Boxes lined the walls, blueprints, sketchbooks, little fragments of the life I'd built while trying to keep another family from falling apart. I was learning that you can't save people by breaking yourself smaller. You just disappear. So I began designing again, slowly, quietly, not skyscrapers or showpieces, but homes, structures built for breathing, for light, places where mistakes could settle without rotting the foundation. Hannah visited every weekend. She brought pastries from the bakery where she'd just started a new shift. Her uniform still smelled faintly of yeast and sugar. We'd sit by the window, legs tucked under us, watching ferries cross the Sound. "I thought the city would feel smaller after everything," she said one morning, sipping coffee. "It doesn't," I told her. "It feels truer. Like it finally stopped pretending to be perfect." She smiled. "Guess we match it now." We laughed, not the brittle kind from before, but the quiet laughter that rebuilds trust one sound at a time. When she left, she always hugged me longer than she used to. Each time, the space between guilt and grace got smaller. At work, the restoration project took shape. The building had once been a factory, long abandoned. Its bricks were scarred by decades of smoke and salt, but underneath the grime you could still see a pattern, a rhythm, the persistence of something made to last. Standing inside it one afternoon, I ran my fingers along the wall. The surface was rough, uneven, real. That I thought of my family, of our own cracks, how we kept patching and repainting instead of letting air heal the mortar. This time, I didn't want to erase the scars. That I wanted to highlight them. When I presented the concept sketch, open beams, visible weathering, sunlight angled to trace the old lines, the client asked why I hadn't concealed the damage. "Because it tells the truth," I said. That he nodded. "That's rare in design." I almost said it's rarer in people. One afternoon, Evan stopped by the site that he transferred to another firm but still checked in occasionally, always with the same gentle sarcasm. "So," he said, hands in pockets, "still saving lost buildings?" "Only the ones that want to be saved." He smiled. "How's Hannah?" "Better. Working. Laughing. Trying. And you?" I looked up at the skylight where dust floated in beams of light. "I think I'm finally designing something for myself." "About time," he said. We walked outside together. The air smelled of rain again, faint but promising. Seattle never fully forgets who it is. That night I drove to my parents' house for dinner. The porch lights were on. Mom's herbs overflowed their pots. Dad had fixed the railing, sanded, painted. It gleamed in the fading sun. When he opened the door, the smell of roasted vegetables and lemon filled the air. "Thought you'd never make it," he said, smiling. "I brought dessert," I said, holding up a pie. Hannah laughed from the kitchen. "From scratch?" "From the bakery," I admitted. We ate, we talked. No tension, no unspoken ledger of guilt, just the normal rhythm of forks and stories. After dinner, Dad poured tea. That he said, "You know, I used to think family was about loyalty. Now I think it's about learning when to forgive and when to let people learn." Mom nodded. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's deciding the story isn't over." Hannah looked at me. "And what's your version?" I thought for a moment. "Family," I said, "is the place that can still hold you after you stop pretending to fit." No one argued. The rain began again, gentle, approving. Later, as I helped Mom with the dishes, she said, "You're leaving soon." I opened Hannah's envelope again. The photo of us at the county fair, faces sticky with cotton candy, her arm around me. On the back she'd written, "Forgive yourself for being the strong one." I traced the words with my thumb. Maybe strength isn't about holding everything together. Maybe it's about letting some things fall so the truth can stand. Outside, a ferry horn echoed across the bay. The reflection of its lights rippled on the water, bent, but still beautiful. Weeks passed. The restoration project neared completion. On the final inspection day, I walked through the building alone. Sunlight poured through new windows onto old brick. The air smelled faintly of sawdust and paint. For the first time in years, I felt perfectly still inside myself. Every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the whisper of wind through vents, felt earned. Like the building, I hadn't been rebuilt into something new. I'd just been restored to my original strength. That evening, I drove back to the pier where the ferries dock. Hannah met me there with 2 cups of coffee. We stood by the railing, the city stretching behind us, lights flickering like tired stars. "Do you ever wonder," she said, "if we'd still be here if none of it happened?" "Maybe," I said. "But we'd still be pretending." She nodded. "I used to think pain breaks you. Now I think it's how life edits what doesn't belong." I smiled. "Architects call that subtraction." She laughed. "And what do sisters call it?" "Growing up." We drank in silence for a while, the cold air soft against our faces. The ferry horn sounded again, long and low. Somewhere in that deep vibration, I heard the city's forgiveness. Later, back at my apartment, I wrote in my journal for the first time in months. Forgiveness isn't the end of a story, that it's the moment you realize the storm was never there to drown you. It was there to teach you how to breathe underwater. I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and listened to the rain return, steady and soft. Tomorrow would be ordinary again, and that was enough. 6 months is a strange measure, that it's long enough for a garden to grow back, short enough for a scar to still itch when it rains. Seattle had folded into late autumn, leaves the color of rust and tea, air tasting like metal and wood smoke. That I had learned the names of my neighbors, the timing of the ferry horns, the way the light slipped across my apartment at 4 p.m. and turned the walls the color of old paper. That a life had returned. Not loud, not triumphant, just steady. That I had started to trust steady. In the mornings I walked the waterfront with coffee in a paper cup, the city unfurled in small, routine kindnesses, a nod from the florist taping tissue around lilies, a wave from the barista who remembered I liked too much cinnamon, gulls arguing with conviction I envied. That I kept my phone on silent until 9. Silence is a discipline at first, then it becomes a room you live in. Work had settled into a rhythm too. The restoration in Tacoma was open, glass catching sky, brick left honest, light laying its long hand across old floors. On opening day, the client shook mine and said, "You made the building breathe." I smiled and thought, no, it finally allowed itself to. Trauma is like that, healing when it's ready, not when you schedule it. Hannah showed up that afternoon with a paper bag of pastries she didn't let me refuse. Her hands were flour soft and strong. "How's the famous architect?" she teased. "Infamous," I said. "I leave the nails visible." She grinned. "I like seeing where things hold." We walked the atrium. She trailed her fingers along the old brick. "I keep thinking about how you didn't paint over the scars." "They're the map," I said. "Of what?" "Of where not to pretend." She nodded, quiet for a moment, then said, "I don't check my old messages anymore." "Not even to prove you've moved on?" "That's still checking," she smiled. "I'm done negotiating with what left." There was nothing to add. Sometimes the best congratulations is not asking for more explanation. Dad was different. That he had become a man who measured the day by small completions, recocked a window, oiled a hinge, made soup that tasted like the restaurant after closing time. When I came by on Sundays, he would press a Tupperware into my hands like it was a medal. The first time he did it, I had to step outside and pretend the air was too cold. Love arrives in the smallest containers. One Sunday, he found me on the porch before dinner, my breath making clouds in the air. That he stood beside me a long minute and said, "I used to be proud of volume, you know. Of running a place where my voice could fill a room." I watched his hands. They still had the old burns now? I asked. "Now I'm proud when I listen before I answer." He looked at me then. "I'm proud of you as a listener and as someone who speaks." The sentence was so simple it knocked a wall down inside me I didn't realize was still standing. Mom had taken to writing lists on index cards and leaving them everywhere, in the kitchen, on the microwave, tucked into book spines like soft bookmarks. "Buy rosemary, take a walk, call Emily about Friday," and once, on a card I found in the sugar jar, "There are many kinds of forgiveness. Pick the kind that lets you sleep." She laughed when I held it up. "I keep lists to remind myself I'm not only what I remember, but also what I choose." She said, "Mothers don't stop teaching just because we start paying our own bills." There were practicalities too, restitution forms, meetings with the prosecutor to finalize statements from the other women. They sent updates in short, careful emails, disbursement expected by end of quarter, amounts prorated, money was coming back, piece by patient piece, not all of it, never all of it, but enough to prove the world sometimes returns a portion of what it took. That I learned to take that portion and call it mercy instead of math. One morning, an official envelope arrived, heavy, off-white, with my name printed like a verdict. Inside was a letter about a parole hearing scheduled far in the future, and a checkbox asking whether I wanted to be notified of any changes in custody. That I checked yes, not because I wanted updates on him, but because I wanted a record that my voice existed. Paper can carry what a throat is too tired to say. Hannah got one too. She came over that evening, letter folded into a square she couldn't make smaller. "I don't want to go," she said. "You don't have to," I answered. She stared out at the water. What if facing him is not strength but performance? Strength, I said, is doing the thing that actually makes you freer, not the thing people clap for. She put the letter on my table like a tiny, sleeping animal and let it be. Evan drifted in and out of those months, the way good friends do when they know you're measuring your days differently. That we walked Ballard on Saturdays, talking about nothing, or stood under a bakery awning eating croissants like the rain wasn't happening. Once he said, "You're quieter now, and louder when it matters." That's a compliment? An architecture compliment, he smirked. Better acoustics. We didn't define what we were, because I was finally learning not to blueprint every feeling before I felt it. Buildings need expansion joints, so do people. At work, a junior on my team, Noor, asked to see my old sketches that I hesitated. Old work is a mirror you don't always want to hold. She flipped through them anyway. "Reverend, you leave room for light," she said. "Light is not a decoration," I told her. "It's structural." Later, alone at my desk, I realized I meant it about more than windows. One rainy Wednesday, the past tested itself. A number I didn't recognize flashed across my screen that I shouldn't have answered. That I did. A voice I hadn't heard in months, careful, too familiar, asked, "Is this Emily?" I knew your sister. My name is Aaron. I worked with Mason, before. Not like that, I mean. I lost money too. The room tilted the way elevators do when they start and stop. "We're filing a civil suit," he continued quickly. "Class action. There's a group. We're all hurting." I finished trying, he said. "We thought, maybe you would join." I took his email down, thanked him, ended the call, and stared at the wall where the afternoon light made a small, stubborn square. I didn't tell Hannah that day, not because I wanted to keep a secret, but because I wanted to keep a boundary. Not every open door is an invitation. Some are just drafts. 2 days later, I forwarded the email to the prosecutor, asked for advice, then took a long walk in the rain without my coat. Cold water on your face is a truth serum. It tells you what still hurts and what just remembers it should. That night, I called Hannah. "There's a civil suit forming," I said. "You don't have to join. But if you want to, I'll go with you to the meeting." She was quiet long enough that I heard her breathe. Then, "I want to pay the right debts. Not the ones that keep charging me." "Okay," I said. "We'll ask questions. And say no if our peace costs more than the check." Peace is labor. That it's unglamorous and daily. You fix the hinge that squeaks. You answer the letter without writing your whole autobiography in the margins. You return the dish you borrowed. You water the rosemary and accept that sometimes it dies anyway. On a Sunday in November, we hosted dinner at my apartment. Mom, Dad, Hannah, me, a table too small on purpose so our elbows touched and nobody could hide behind distance. Rain ticked the glass. That we ate roast chicken because traditions deserve a chance at redemption. No toasts, just a story from Dad about a customer who tipped in guitar picks. Mom's joke about index cards multiplying like rabbits. Hannah's quiet update that her bakery manager had offered her a full-time schedule and health insurance. I told them Noor had presented her first concept to a client and made a joke about how I almost cried when they approved her skylight. After, while we washed dishes, Dad said, "You know what I miss least?" "What?" "The version of me who thought being right was safer than being kind." I set a plate on the rack and let that sentence find its place on my shelf of things to keep. When they left, Hannah lingered in the doorway with her coat half on. She pulled out a small envelope. "Don't worry. It's not a photo this time." She smiled. Inside was a receipt, her first contribution to Mom and Dad's mortgage in months. It wasn't the number. It was the line at the bottom. Paid by Hannah Carter. An O flourish. No apology, just a name taking its weight back. We hugged. It wasn't a reconciliation crescendo. It was two women deciding to keep choosing each other even when the music didn't swell. In bed that night, I read a page from a book I kept on the nightstand. Thin essays on repair. A line caught me. The opposite of betrayal isn't trust. It's presence. I closed the book and watched the red dot of a tugboat move across the bay like a slow beat of courage. I thought of all the versions of me that had tried to fix people by making myself smaller. I thought of how the city had taught me to live with gray without calling it failure. I thought of how buildings endure because someone keeps showing up with a tool and an hour, and the stubborn belief that a hinge can stop squeaking. Presence. Then I could do presence. Toward the end of the 6th month, I took a day off without explaining it to anyone. I rode the ferry to Bainbridge just to watch the city peel away and return again. On the deck, Wind cut through my coat, sharp, bracing, honest. An older woman in a red scarf stood beside me, both hands on the rail. After a while, she said, "You don't look seasick. You look like you're remembering something you forgot to forgive." I laughed once. "Is it that obvious?" "It's what ferries are for," she said. "Carrying the pieces you don't know where to put yet." When we docked, she disappeared into the crowd, as if kindly ghosts have schedules too. I walked the waterfront and bought a small notebook with a blue cover. On the first page I wrote, "Closure is not an event. It's a practice." Then, underneath, as an architect might, notes on maintenance. I listed what I wanted to keep upright: weekly calls to mom, Sunday dinners when possible, saying no without an alibi, plant something every month, keep light structural. On the ride back, the city rose again: glass, water, cranes, the stubborn, ordinary grace of a place that refuses to be only one thing. Home looked exactly the same, that I had changed enough to meet it. When I unlocked my door, the late light slid across the floor like a welcome you don't have to earn. I set the notebook on the table. In the hallway mirror I caught a glimpse of a woman with rain in her hair and steadiness in her shoulders, not perfect. Present. I made tea and stood by the window until the lights across the bay began to prick the water into constellations. Somewhere out there, a younger version of me was still asking if storms are punishments. I wanted to tell her what I knew now: storms are editors. They remove what will not hold, so what remains can. The kettle clicked off. I poured, I breathed. I didn't check my phone. 6 months had turned what happened into what shaped me. The difference is everything. Winter came back gently, like a teacher who no longer needs to raise her voice. Seattle's nights lengthened. The rain turned fine again. Threads instead of ropes. By then, the building in Tacoma had its tenants. The bakery where Hannah worked had regulars who asked for her by name. Mom and Dad were planning a short trip down the coast, something they hadn't done since before the restaurant closed. Life had found its smaller, better pace. And for once, nobody was trying to rush it. I spent evenings sketching at my kitchen table, the blue notebook open beside me, not blueprints this time, just lines that bend into thoughts: how a door remembers being opened, how light forgets to judge what it touches, how forgiveness, when drawn from the right angle, looks almost like courage. One Friday I took the ferry again, the same route, different weather. I wanted to see if peace looked the same from the water. It did. And it didn't. The skyline was sharper now, the glass cleaner, the horizon closer. Maybe nothing outside had changed. Maybe I finally looked without the filter of hurt. I wrote a note in the margin of the notebook: healing is not the opposite of pain. It's the friendship that forms with it once you stop pretending you never met. When I returned home, a letter waited in the mail slot, handwritten, unfamiliar. Inside, a short message from one of the other women in the case. "You don't know me, but thank you for showing up in court. Seeing you there made me believe the damage was survivable." I sat with that for a long time. No one tells you that sometimes the most important thank yous arrive from strangers. They are proof that your worst day can still become someone else's map. I folded the letter back into its envelope and placed it in my notebook under notes on maintenance. Presence, again, still doing its quiet work. The following weekend, Hannah and I drove north to the Skagit Valley tulip fields. Rows and rows of color stretched out like a second sky under our feet. Red, gold, white, endless. She rolled the window down, hair whipping in the wind. "Do you ever think we'd have ended up here?" she asked. "Not like this," I said. She laughed softly. "I like this version better." We stopped by the edge of a field where the petals had begun to fall. They lay scattered on the dirt, bright even in pieces. Hannah knelt, picked one up, twirled it between her fingers. "Maybe broken things don't lose color," she said. "Maybe," I agreed, "they just finally matched the ground they grew from." We stood there until the light turned gold. No need for more conversation. The world was speaking fluently enough. Back in Seattle, I started teaching a night course. Design for Repair. It wasn't about architecture. Not really. It was about what remains. I told my students, every structure is a conversation between stress and support. Your job is to make sure the argument ends in balance. They laughed, thinking it was metaphor. It wasn't, neither was life. After class, I often walked home under the viaduct where the concrete echoed footsteps into music. It reminded me of our first dinner after the truth broke. The same rhythm of silence followed by something human enough to keep going. Cities, families, people. They all hum in the same key once you stop demanding melody. One evening in February, I found a message on my phone. A number I didn't recognize again. But this time it began, "Good evening, Miss Carter." It was the parole board office. A routine update. Mason Vale has declined his early release review. I stared at the text, waiting for a reaction that didn't come. No anger, no triumph, just stillness, like a book finally closing itself. I deleted the message, then looked out the window. Across the bay, the ferries were tiny lights moving in deliberate lines. I whispered, not to him, not even to the past, "Stay gone." And the night obliged. The next morning brought a sky so clear it felt temporary. Sunlight pooled in the corners of the room like something new trying out permanence. I brewed coffee, turned on the radio, and opened the notebook again. A new page waited. At the top, I wrote, "Blueprint for after." Then, in careful lines, "Forgive, but archive. Love, but keep the receipts of truth. Work, but rest before the floor cracks. Speak, even if the room prefers quiet. And always, always leave space for light, asterisk." I closed the cover. It wasn't a plan. It was a direction. That evening I called Mom. She answered on the first ring, the sound of ocean waves behind her. They were already on their trip. "Guess where we are," she said, "somewhere warmer than me." She laughed. "Cannon Beach. Your dad's trying to cook clams without burning them." In the background he shouted, "I'm improving." I smiled so hard it hurt. "Be careful," I said. "Always," she answered, and then, softer, "We're proud of you, Em." After the call, I stood by the window, phone still warm in my hand. Outside, the wind lifted the edge of a cloud, and the moon stepped through, unassuming, silver, steady. Every story needs one last light. A week later, the students in my class presented their final projects. One had repaired an old violin so it could play again. Another rebuilt a door from driftwood and glass. The youngest, Noor, restored a street bench people had stopped using. She said, "I didn't want to make it new. I just wanted people to trust it again." I looked at her and felt something loosen in my chest. Maybe that was all any of us were doing, trying to make trust sit safely under weight again. After they left, I stayed in the classroom alone. The overhead lights buzzed softly, the smell of sawdust still in the air. I ran my hand along the bench, rough edges and all, and whispered, "It's enough." That night, back home, I watched the rain blur the skyline. Every droplet carried a reflection, small, incomplete, but together they remade the city. I thought about how far we'd all come. Mom with her lists, Dad with his soup, Hannah with her steady laughter, me with my notebook of quiet blue. None of us erased what happened. We just stopped living inside the echo. I whispered into the room, "We're okay." And for the first time, the silence answered back, not with emptiness, but with calm. Months later, spring would return again, inevitable, patient. Maybe I'd plant herbs on the balcony this time. Maybe Hannah would visit with a recipe she finally mastered. Maybe Dad's soup would taste different with coastal air in it. Maybe none of that matters as much as the simple, solid fact that we kept showing up. Because survival is not the same as living. Living is what you choose after. When the final credits of our family story roll in my mind, there's no dramatic score, just the sound of rain easing, someone laughing off screen, a kettle beginning to sing. I imagine a voice, my own, speaking to whoever's listening. If you've ever been told you're the quiet one, remember, quiet doesn't mean weak. It means you've been listening long enough to know which words deserve to be built into walls and which should stay as air. And if life ever takes everything from you, money, safety, illusion, let it. What's left is the foundation. From there, you can build anything. The screen fades to gray, then light, then nothing at all. Only the sound remains. A heartbeat, soft and steady, echoing like rain on glass. Sometimes the loudest victories are the ones no one sees. The moment you choose calm instead of proving a point. The day you rebuild, not to be admired, but simply to belong again. If this story reached something quiet inside you, remember, you're not alone in the rebuilding. Every scar, every silence, every late-night decision to stay gentle, it all counts. So keep showing up, keep choosing the kind of strength that doesn't need an audience, and when the rain returns, as it always does, let it remind you how light finds its way home drop by drop. If this story spoke to you, share it, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what did you rebuild after your own storm?